The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Henderson mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart quietly down the hallway, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished stone. She had learned long ago that in houses like this it was better to be invisible. 3 years. That's how long she had been working for the Henderson family, and in all that time she had perfected the art of blending into the background. She knew exactly when Mr. Henderson left for his law firm, when Mrs. Henderson headed to her yoga class, and when their 17-year-old son Jake would stumble downstairs, usually complaining about something or the other. This particular morning was different, though. There was electricity in the air, the kind that comes before big events. Tonight was the annual Henderson Charity Gala, and the entire house buzzed with preparation. Caterers rushed in and out of the kitchen, florists arranged massive bouquets in crystal vases, and Mrs. Henderson's voice could be heard from 3 rooms away as she barked orders into her phone. Maria made her way to the living room, the crown jewel of the Henderson home. It was a space that could easily fit her entire apartment twice over. Persian rugs covered the hardwood floors, oil paintings in golden frames hung on the walls, and in the center of it all sat a magnificent black grand piano. A Steinway, she had noticed on her first day. The same brand her father used to play. Back home in Argentina, though his had been much older and not nearly as pristine as this one, every morning Maria spent extra time in this room. Not because it needed more cleaning, the Hendersons rarely used it except for entertaining, but because of the piano. She would dust it carefully, running her cloth along its smooth curves, polishing the keys until they gleamed. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, she would press a key very softly just to hear the pure, clear note ring out in the empty room. Today, as she cleaned, she could hear voices from upstairs. Jake was on the phone with his friends, and even though she tried not to listen, his voice carried down the grand staircase. "Dude, you have to come tonight," Jake was saying. "My parents are throwing this huge party for some charity thing. All these rich people are going to be here, and I have the perfect plan to make it interesting." Maria continued her work, but something in Jake's tone made her pause. There was a meanness to it, a kind of excitement that didn't sound quite right. "You know our maid, right? The Spanish one, Maria or whatever. I'm thinking we should mess with her a bit. You know, for laughs." Maria's hand froze on the piano bench. She had dealt with Jake's attitude before. He wasn't openly cruel, but he had that casual indifference that came with growing up wealthy. To him, she wasn't really a person, she was just part of the furniture, there to make his life easier. "I'm thinking we invite her to play the piano in front of everyone," Jake continued, his voice getting more animated. "Can you imagine? Some cleaning lady trying to play classical music in front of all my parents' fancy friends? It would be hilarious." Maria felt her stomach drop. She had worked so hard to keep her head down, to do her job without causing any trouble. She needed this work. After her husband died 5 years ago, this job had been a lifeline. It paid for her small apartment, put food on the table, and helped her send a little money back to her elderly mother in Buenos Aires. She forced herself to keep cleaning, to keep moving, even as Jake's laughter drifted down from upstairs. He had no idea what he was talking about. None of them did. The irony wasn't lost on her. Every day she cleaned this piano, this beautiful instrument that sat silent and untouched like an expensive decoration. The Hendersons had bought it not because they loved music, but because it looked impressive. It was a status symbol, nothing more, but Maria knew pianos. She knew the weight of the keys, the way they responded to touch, the way a single note could carry so much emotion it could make you cry. She had grown up surrounded by music, in a house where piano melodies were as common as conversation. Her father, Carlos Santos, had been one of Buenos Aires' most promising young pianists. He had studied at the conservatory, performed in concert halls, and had dreams of playing with the world's great orchestras. But life had other plans. The economic crisis hit Argentina hard in the late 1990s, and suddenly there was no money for concert tickets, no funding for the arts, No work for musicians. Like so many others, the Santos family had been forced to leave everything behind and start over in America. Carlos took work in a factory, his skilled fingers that once danced across piano keys now working assembly lines. Maria's mother cleaned offices at night, and Maria herself had worked various jobs: waitress, store clerk, house cleaner, anything. To help the family survive, music became a luxury they couldn't afford. Their piano had been sold before they left Argentina, and in their new life in Connecticut, there was no room for such dreams. Carlos never played again. He said it hurt too. Much to touch the keys and remember what he had lost, but Maria remembered. She remembered sitting beside her father on the piano bench when she was little, her small hands trying to copy his movements. She remembered the way his face would light up when she played a piece correctly, the pride in his voice when he told her she had a gift. "Music lives in your soul, Mia," he used to say. "It never leaves you, even when the piano does." Now, 25 years later, she cleaned other people's pianos and pretended those memories didn't exist. It was easier that way. Less painful. As the morning wore on, the house filled with more people. The catering staff arrived with boxes of food. The event coordinator rushed around with her clipboard, and Mrs. Henderson emerged from her room in full planning mode. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson called out as she swept past the living room, "make sure this room is perfect tonight. We'll have over 100 guests, and this is where the speeches will happen." "Yes, Mrs. Henderson," Maria replied quietly, the same way she always did. Mrs. Henderson paused at the doorway and looked back at the piano. "I still think we should have hired a pianist for tonight. Music always makes these events more elegant." "Too late now, Mum," Jake said, appearing beside his mother with that same smirk Maria had heard in his voice earlier. "Besides, I have a better idea for entertainment." Mrs. Henderson looked at her son suspiciously, but she was too busy to ask questions. She hurried off to deal with some crisis in the kitchen, leaving Jake alone with Maria. For a moment, they looked at each other across the grand room. Jake saw a middle-aged woman in a uniform, someone whose name he barely remembered and whose life he never thought about. Maria saw a young man who had never known struggle, who had never understood what it meant to lose everything and start over. Neither of them could have imagined how much their lives were about to change. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Maria worked quietly, efficiently, making sure every surface gleamed and every detail was perfect. She had done this many times before for the Hendersons' parties, though never one quite this large. As evening approached and the first guests began to arrive, Maria retreated to the kitchen with the other staff. Tonight she would serve drinks and appetizers, smile politely when spoken to, and try to stay out of the way. She had no idea that in just a few hours, Jake's cruel joke would change everything. She had no idea that her years of hiding, of keeping her true self locked away, were about to come to an end in the most unexpected way possible. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the night that would change Maria Santos' life forever was about to begin. The Henderson mansion had transformed into something magical by 8 o'clock that evening. Soft golden light spilled from every window, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted out into the cool night air. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway as Connecticut's wealthiest families arrived in their finest clothes. Maria stood in the kitchen, adjusting her black uniform one last time before picking up a silver tray of appetizers. She had done this dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was because the guest list was bigger than usual. Or maybe it was because she couldn't shake the memory of Jake's phone conversation from that morning. "Remember, we're invisible tonight," whispered Rosa, another member of the cleaning staff who had been hired just for the evening. "Smile, serve, and stay quiet." Maria nodded, though something in her stomach felt twisted. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now they were telling her to be careful. The living room was packed with people when she entered. Men in expensive suits stood in small groups, discussing business deals and golf games. Women in designer dresses sipped champagne and showed off their jewelry. Everyone looked like they belonged in a magazine. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect lives. Maria moved through the crowd like a ghost, offering small plates of fancy food to guests who barely looked at her. This was the world she worked in, but could never be part of. She was there to serve, to make their evening more comfortable, and then disappear when it was over. "Maria!" The voice cut through the crowd, and she turned to see Mrs. Henderson approaching with a group of well-dressed women. "Ladies, this is Maria, one of our household staff," Mrs. Henderson said with the kind of smile she used when she wanted to appear charitable. "She's been with us for 3 years now, haven't you, Maria?" "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied softly, keeping her eyes down. "Such a hard worker," Mrs. Henderson continued to her friends. "I don't know what we'd do without her." The women smiled politely, but their eyes had already moved on to something more interesting. To them, Maria was just another service worker, as forgettable as the wallpaper dot as the evening progressed. Maria noticed Jake moving through the crowd with 3 of his friends. They were all about 17, all dressed in expensive clothes that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. She recognized the look on their faces, the same expression Jake had worn as a child when he was planning some mischief. The 4 boys huddled together near the piano, whispering and laughing. Every few minutes, one of them would glance in Maria's direction, and her uneasiness grew stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Henderson's voice boomed across the room as he tapped his champagne glass with a fork. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for this wonderful cause." The crowd quieted down, turning their attention to their host. Maria used the distraction to slip toward the kitchen, hoping to avoid whatever Jake was planning, but she wasn't fast. "Enough, wait, Maria." Jake's voice rang out across the room, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't go anywhere just yet." Every head in the room turned to look at her. Maria felt her cheeks burn as 100 pairs of eyes focused on her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but there was nowhere to go. Jake stepped forward, with a big smile that didn't reach his eyes. His friends flanked him like bodyguards, all of them grinning. "Mom, Dad, everyone," Jake announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I have a special surprise for tonight's entertainment." Mrs. Henderson looked confused. "Jake, what are you doing?" "Well, I was thinking," Jake continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "We have this beautiful piano here, and it just sits there looking pretty. Wouldn't it be great to hear some music tonight?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded, thinking this sounded like a lovely idea. "The thing is," Jake said, his grin getting wider, "I found out that Maria here is musical. Aren't you, Maria?" Maria's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I mean, she must know something about music, right?" Jake pressed on. "She cleans our piano every day. She must have picked up a few things." His friends started snickering, and Maria realized with horror what was happening. This was Jake's idea of a joke. He wanted to embarrass her in front of all these important people, to make her look foolish for their entertainment. "Jake, stop this right now," Mrs. Henderson said sharply, but it was too late. The damage was already done. "Come on, Maria," Jake said loudly, gesturing toward the piano. "Play something for us. I'm sure you know at least chopsticks or something." Simple like that, the laughter that followed felt like knives. Maria stood frozen in the middle of the room, holding her silver tray with shaking hands. She could feel the weight of every stare, could hear the whispered comments starting to spread. Through the crowd, "This is awful," someone murmured. "That boy is being cruel," another voice said. "Someone should stop this," a third person added, but nobody moved. Nobody stepped forward to help her. They were all too fascinated by the drama unfolding before them, too curious to see what would happen next. Jake's friends were barely containing their laughter now. One of them had actually pulled out his phone and was recording, probably planning to share Maria's humiliation on social media later. I don't play piano," Maria managed to whisper, her voice barely audible in the large room. "Oh, come on," Jake insisted, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Don't be modest. I bet you're better than you think. Besides, how hard can it be? Just press some keys and make some noise." More laughter erupted from his friends and a few other guests who thought this was all very amusing. Maria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Mr. Henderson finally stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. "Jake, that's enough. Apologize to Maria right now." But Jake was too caught up in his performance to stop. "Dad, relax. It's just for fun. Besides, I'm sure Maria would love to show off her skills, wouldn't you, Maria?" The room fell silent again, waiting for her response. Maria looked around at all the faces staring at her, some amused, some uncomfortable, some simply curious. She saw Mrs. Henderson shaking her head in disappointment at her son. She saw Mr. Henderson looking angry and embarrassed. She saw Jake's friends still recording with their phones, and then something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the memory of her father's voice telling her that music lived in her soul. Maybe it was 25 years of keeping quiet, of making herself small, of letting people assume things about her because of her job and her accent. Maybe it was just the simple unfairness of it all, the fact that this spoiled teenager thought he could humiliate her for fun. Whatever it was, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years, not anger, exactly, but something stronger. A kind of quiet determination that started deep in her chest and spread through her entire body. She set down her silver tray on a nearby table, her hands steady now. The room watched in fascination as she smoothed down her uniform and walked slowly toward the piano. "Maria, you don't have to do this," Mrs. Henderson said softly, but Maria wasn't listening anymore. She was remembering the weight of piano keys. Under her fingers, the way her father used to smile when she played. The feeling of music flowing through her like electricity. She reached the piano bench and paused for a moment, looking at the magnificent instrument that she had cleaned so carefully every morning for 3 years. Jake and his friends were practically bouncing with excitement, waiting for her to embarrass herself. They had no idea what was about to happen. Maria sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly, her movements precise and purposeful. She placed her hands above the keys, and for just a moment, the room held its breath. The boy who had started this cruel joke was about to learn that sometimes, when you try to humiliate someone, you end up revealing more about them than you ever imagined. Possible. And sometimes what you reveal changes everything. Maria's fingers hovered just above the piano keys, and for a moment that felt like forever, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The silence was so complete that she could hear the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the gentle clink of ice in someone's drink, even the distant sound of cars passing on the street outside. She looked down at the keys, 88 black and white rectangles that had been silent for so long in this house. To everyone watching, they were just part of an expensive decoration. But to Maria, they were old friends she hadn't spoken to in decades. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she could feel sweat on her palms despite the cool air conditioning. 25 years. That's how long it had been since she had seriously played piano, since she had allowed herself to truly touch the keys with purpose and passion. Behind her, Jake shifted impatiently. "Come on," he said with a nervous laugh. "We don't have all night." His friends snickered again, their phones still recording what they expected to be a spectacular failure. They were already imagining the videos they would post, the comments from their classmates, the way this embarrassing moment would follow Maria around the internet forever. But something was happening to Maria that none of them could see. As her fingers made contact with the smooth ivory keys, muscle memory that had been sleeping for decades suddenly woke up. Her father's voice echoed in her mind from all those years ago in Buenos Aires. "Feel the music first, Mia," he used to say. "Don't think about the notes. Think about what you want to say." What did she want to say right now? What words could she possibly use to explain 25 years of silence? 25 years of hiding who she really was, 25 years of letting people see only what they expected to see. She couldn't use words, but she could use music. Maria closed her eyes and let her fingers find their home on the keys. Without conscious thought, without planning, she began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The first note rang out clear and pure in the silent room, and everything changed in that instant. It wasn't the tentative peck of someone pretending to know piano. It wasn't the fumbling attempt Jake had expected. It was the rich, resonant tone of someone who understood exactly how to make a piano sing. The second note followed, then the third, and suddenly the room was filled with music that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace, her whole body swaying slightly as she let the melody flow through her. Jake's smirk disappeared. His mouth literally fell open as he stared at the woman he had tried to humiliate. This wasn't possible. This, was their maid, their cleaning lady, the woman who emptied their trash and dusted their furniture? She couldn't possibly be playing like this, but she was. The music grew more complex, more passionate. Maria's hands danced across the keys, sometimes gentle and soft, sometimes powerful and thunderous. She played with the technical skill of a professional, but more than that, she played with the heart of someone who had lived through joy and loss, hope and disappointment. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly. She had studied piano as a child, had taken lessons for years, and she knew enough to recognize what she was hearing. This wasn't just good, this was extraordinary. "Oh my God," whispered one of the guests, a woman who served on the board of the local symphony. "She's incredible." Word spread through the crowd in hushed whispers. People stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Champagne glasses remained untouched in hands that had frozen in amazement. Everyone in the room understood they were witnessing something special, something none of them had expected. The melody shifted and changed, telling a story without words. In the music you could hear Maria's childhood in Argentina, the sound of her father playing late into the night while she fell asleep to the gentle melodies. You could hear the pain of leaving everything behind, the struggle of starting over in a new country, the years of silence and suppressed dreams. Jake's friends had stopped recording. They stood with their phones hanging useless in their hands, too stunned to remember what they had been doing. The cruel joke they had planned was backfiring in the most spectacular way possible. As Maria played, memories flooded back. She remembered sitting on the piano bench next to her father when she was 7 years old, her small hands trying to copy his movements. She remembered the first time she played a piece perfectly, the pride in his eyes, the way he had hugged her and said she had a gift. "Music is the language of the soul," he had told her. "When you play, you're not just making sounds, you're sharing your heart with the world." She had forgotten that feeling, had buried it so deep that she thought it was gone forever. But now, sitting at this piano in front of all these people, she remembered what it felt like to let her soul speak through music. The Chopin piece required incredible technical skill, rapid passages that demanded years of training, complex harmonies that most amateur pianists could never master. But Maria played it as if it were as natural as breathing. Her fingers found every note with precision. Her timing was perfect. Her expression was flawless. Dr. Peterson, a retired music professor who was standing near the piano, felt tears forming in his eyes. He had heard this piece performed by professionals at concert halls around the world, but he had rarely heard it played with such raw emotion, such genuine feeling. Maria's playing grew more intense, more passionate. The music filled not just the room, but seemed to seep into the walls, the furniture, the very air they breathed. People who had never appreciated classical music found themselves completely captivated. Mrs. Henderson looked at her son, saw the shock and growing shame on his face, and felt her own heart breaking. How could they have been so blind? This woman had been in their house for 3 years, and they had never seen her, never really known her at all. The piece built to its dramatic climax, Maria's hands flying across the keys and passages that would challenge even professional pianists. But she played with the confidence of someone who had been born to make music, someone for whom these complex melodies were as familiar as old friends. And then gradually the music began to soften. The thunderous passages gave way to gentler melodies, like a storm slowly calming. Maria's playing became more intimate, more personal, as if she were sharing her deepest secrets with the room. As the final notes of the Chopin piece faded away, Maria didn't stop. Without pause, she transitioned into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece that was even more challenging, even more emotionally demanding. Jake stood paralyzed, watching this transformation happen before his eyes. This morning, Maria had been invisible to him. just another servant in his family's house. Now she was revealing depths of talent and artistry that he could never have imagined. The Rachmaninoff flowed like liquid poetry from her fingers. This was music that spoke of longing and loss, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. It was Maria's story told in melody and harmony, her life laid bare through the language of music. People in the crowd began to cry openly. The beauty of what they were hearing, combined with the realization of how wrong they had been about this woman, was overwhelming. They had all been guilty of the same blindness, seeing only what they expected to see, never looking deeper. As Maria played, she felt something healing inside her. For 25 years, she had kept this part of herself locked away, had convinced herself that it was better to forget, easier to pretend that music had never been important to her. But music was more than important, it was essential. It was who she had always been. Even when she was cleaning houses and serving appetizers and making herself invisible, the boy who had started this as a cruel joke could only stand and watch as his victim became the hero of the evening. As his attempted humiliation became her triumphant revelation, the music continued to pour from the piano, and with each note Maria Santos was becoming herself again. The Rachmaninoff concerto flowed from Maria's fingers like water from a spring that had been blocked for too long. Each note seemed to release years of pent-up emotion, decades of dreams that had been carefully tucked away but never truly forgotten. The melody soared through the room, wrapping around every person present and drawing them into a world they had never expected to enter. Mrs. Henderson found herself gripping her husband's arm, tears streaming down her carefully applied makeup. She had hired Maria 3 years ago based on references and a brief interview. She had seen a quiet, hard-working woman who needed a job and could keep house efficiently. Never once had she imagined that the person folding her laundry and organizing her closets was capable of this level of artistry. The music told stories that words could never capture. In the gentle passages you could hear Maria's childhood in Buenos Aires, the sound of her father playing while she did homework at the kitchen table. In the more dramatic sections, you could feel the heartbreak of leaving everything behind, the struggle of starting over in a country where nobody knew her name or her story. Jake's friend Tommy, who had been recording on his phone expecting to capture something embarrassing, slowly lowered his device. His hands were shaking, and he couldn't understand why. He had never listened to classical music before, had always thought it was boring old people's music. But this was different. This was alive, electric, powerful in a way that made his chest feel tight. "Dude," he whispered to Jake, but Jake couldn't hear him. Jake was staring at Maria with an expression of complete shock, as if he was seeing her for the first time. Which, in many ways, he was. Dr. Peterson, the retired music professor, stepped closer to the piano, his trained ear picking up details that others might miss. The way Maria handled the technical passages was flawless, but what impressed him even more was her interpretation. She wasn't just playing the notes correctly, she was bringing the music to life, making it breathe and pulse with emotion. He had taught piano for 40 years, had worked with hundreds of students, some of whom had gone on to successful careers as professional musicians. But he had rarely encountered natural talent like this, especially not in someone who had been hiding it for so long. The concerto moved into its most challenging section, a passage that required incredible finger strength and coordination. Maria's hands flew across the keys, hitting every note with precision while maintaining the musical flow. Her years away from serious playing should have made this impossible. Most pianists needed constant practice to maintain this level of technical skill, but somehow Maria's hands remembered everything. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not lost. It was as if her fingers had been waiting all these years for this moment, for permission to dance across the keys again, a woman near. The back of the room pulled out her phone and started recording, but not for the same reasons Jake's friends had earlier. She was a music teacher at the local high school, and she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just good amateur playing, this was professional-level performance. "How is this possible?" she whispered to her husband. The answer was written in every note Maria played. This wasn't something you could fake or stumble into by accident. This level of skill came from years of serious training, from a deep understanding of music that went far beyond just knowing where to put your fingers. As the Rachmaninoff piece reached its emotional climax, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. She felt complete. For 25 years, a part of her had been missing, locked away so tightly that she had almost convinced herself it had never existed. But it had been there all along, waiting. The music grew softer, more intimate, as if Maria was sharing her deepest secrets with everyone in the room. And in a way, she was. Music had always been her truest language, the way she expressed things that were too complex for words, without stopping, without even pausing to acknowledge the stunned silence of her audience. Maria transitioned into something new. This time, it wasn't a famous classical piece. This was something she had composed herself years ago, back when she still believed her dreams were possible. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and hope and the kind of deep sadness that comes from losing something precious. She had written it during her first year in America, when the pain of leaving Argentina was still fresh, when she would lie awake at night remembering the sound of her father's piano echoing through their old house. Mrs. Blackwood, a prominent local socialite who fancied herself an expert on the arts, felt her worldview shifting as she listened. She had always prided herself on being able to spot talent, on knowing quality when she saw it. Yet this woman had been invisible to her, serving drinks at parties for years while harboring this incredible gift. How many other people did she pass by every day without really seeing them? How many stories, how many talents, how many remarkable human beings did she dismiss simply because of their job titles or their uniforms? The original composition told the story of Maria's journey in ways that autobiography never could. You could hear the confusion of arriving in a new country, the determination to survive and provide for her family, the gradual burial of her musical dreams under the weight of practical necessities. But you could also hear something else: hope. Even in the saddest passages, there was an underlying current of strength, of refusal to be completely defeated. The music said what Maria had never been able to say out loud, that she had never really given up, that the dream had just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Jake's friend Danny had stopped looking at his phone entirely. He was staring at Maria with something like awe, trying to reconcile this incredible performance with the quiet woman he had barely noticed serving appetizers an hour earlier. His family had a housekeeper too, a woman named Rosa who came twice a week to clean. He wondered what hidden depths she might have, what dreams she might be carrying while she vacuumed his family's rugs. The composition moved through different movements, each one representing a different chapter of Maria's life. There was a playful section that captured her childhood joy in music, a dark and stormy passage that spoke of loss and struggle, and finally, a triumphant finale that seemed to celebrate survival and the rediscovery of hope. Mr. Henderson, who had been mortified by his son's behavior, found himself thinking about his own life, his own dreams that had been set aside for practical considerations. He had wanted to be a writer once, had even published a few short stories in literary magazines during college. But law school and family responsibilities had gradually pushed those ambitions aside until they seemed like foolish young dreams. Watching Maria reclaim her artistic identity made him wonder if it was too late for him too. If dreams deferred were necessarily dreams destroyed. The music reached its final crescendo, Maria's hands moving with breathtaking speed and precision across the keys. The sound filled the room completely, enveloping everyone present in waves of pure emotion. Some people were crying openly now, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they were experiencing. As the last notes rang out and slowly faded into silence, Maria finally lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment she just sat there, breathing heavily, her eyes still closed. She looked like someone waking up from a long, deep sleep. The room remained silent for several heartbeats, as if everyone needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the applause began. It started with Dr. Peterson, who began clapping with tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Henderson joined in, then her husband, then the music teacher, then Mrs. Blackwood, within seconds. The entire room erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. People weren't just clapping politely, the way they might at the end of any performance. They were applauding with genuine emotion, with recognition of having witnessed something truly special. Many of them were still crying, overwhelmed by the beauty of the music and the power of Maria's story. Jake stood frozen in the middle of it all, his face burning with shame as he realized what he had done. He had tried to humiliate this woman, to make her look foolish for the entertainment of his friends. Instead, he had accidentally given her the platform to reveal her extraordinary gift to the world. The applause continued, growing even louder, as people realized they needed to show Maria how deeply her performance had affected them. This wasn't just about the music, though the music had been incredible. This was about recognition, about seeing someone truly for the first time, about the power of human talent and resilience. Maria finally opened her eyes and turned to face the crowd, and what she saw there changed everything. The applause seemed to go on forever, washing over Maria like waves on a shore she had forgotten existed. When she turned from the piano to face the crowd, she saw something in their faces that she hadn't seen in 25 years, recognition. Not just polite acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation for who she truly was beneath the uniform and the quiet exterior. Mrs. Henderson was the first to approach, her makeup streaked with tears and her hands shaking as she reached for Maria's. "My God, Maria," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. We never knew. I never asked. How could I have been so blind?" Maria felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. For so many years, she had perfected the art of being invisible, of moving through other people's lives without leaving a trace. Now, suddenly, she was the center of attention in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mrs. Henderson continued, still gripping Maria's hands. "That was was professional level." "Better than professional. That was extraordinary." Before Maria could answer, Dr. Peterson stepped forward. His eyes were bright with excitement and something that looked almost like hunger. "Young lady," he said, though at 68 he was probably only a few years older than Maria, "I taught piano at the conservatory for 40 years. I've heard thousands of performances, worked with some incredibly talented musicians. What you just did, that was something special." More people began gathering around the piano, all wanting to talk to Maria, to understand what they had just witnessed. The social barriers that had existed just an hour earlier seemed to have dissolved completely. These people who had barely noticed her serving drinks were now treating her like a celebrity. "Have you ever performed professionally?" asked Mrs. Blackwood. The socialite who served on various arts boards around the state. Maria shook her head, finding her voice for the first time since she had finished playing. "Not here in America," she said quietly. "I studied music in Argentina when I was young, but that was a long time ago." "Argentina!" exclaimed Dr. Peterson. "That explains it." "The Argentine musical tradition is extraordinary." "Who did you study with?" "My father, mostly," Maria replied, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her past. "Carlos Santos. He was a concert pianist before we had to leave." Jake stood at the edge of the growing crowd, watching this transformation happen around him. An hour ago, he had thought of Maria as barely human, just part of the household machinery that kept his life running smoothly. Now he was seeing her surrounded by adults who hung on her every word, who looked at her with respect and admiration. The shame he felt was like a physical weight in his chest. He had tried to humiliate this woman for laughs, and instead he had revealed himself to be cruel and ignorant while she had shown herself to be remarkable. "We need to record this properly," said Mrs. Blackwood, pulling out her phone again. "Would you play something else? Something we can share? The world needs to hear this." Maria hesitated. The idea of being recorded, of having her music shared with strangers, both excited and terrified her. For so long, her music had been private, personal. But maybe it was time for that to change. I suppose I could play something," she said softly. The crowd immediately quieted. people stepping back to give her space while positioning themselves to capture whatever came next. This time, Maria chose something different, a gentle, beautiful piece by Debussy that spoke of moonlight and dreams. As she played, someone in the crowd started recording on their phone. Then another person did the same. Within minutes, multiple people were capturing her performance from different angles, already imagining how they would share this incredible discovery with their own friends and networks. The music flowed from Maria's fingers with the same effortless grace as before, but now there was something different in her posture, in the way she held herself. She was no longer hiding. For the first time in decades, she was allowing herself to be fully seen. When the Debussy piece ended, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. But this time, Maria didn't look overwhelmed. She looked awake, as if some part of her that had been sleeping for 25 years was finally stretching and opening its eyes. "This is going to change everything for you," Mrs. Blackwood said as the applause died down. "I know people at the symphony, people who run concert halls. Would you be interested in performing publicly?" Maria's heart raced at the suggestion. The idea seemed impossible, like something that happened to other people in movies, not to housekeepers in Connecticut. I don't know," she stammered. "I haven't performed in so long. And I have my job here, my responsibilities." "Maria," Mrs. Henderson interrupted gently, "after tonight, things are going to be different. They have to be. What you just shared with us, this is a gift that the world needs to hear." Jake finally found the courage to step forward. His friends had long since disappeared, probably too embarrassed to stick around after their cruel joke had backfired so spectacularly. "Maria," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I need to apologize. What I did tonight was awful. I was trying to embarrass you, and instead you showed us how amazing you are. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry." Maria looked at the teenager who had inadvertently changed her life. She could see genuine remorse in his eyes, real understanding of what he had done wrong. "Jake," she said quietly, "sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. Maybe this needed to happen." By the time the party officially ended, Maria's phone number had been taken by at least a dozen people. Mrs. Blackwood had already called a friend who worked for a local arts organization. Dr. Peterson had offered to help her prepare for auditions. Mrs. Henderson had insisted that Maria's housekeeping duties would be drastically reduced, so she could focus on her music, but the real change wasn't in these offers and opportunities, significant as they were. The real change was in Maria herself. As she finally changed out of her uniform that night, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and saw someone different looking back. The same face, the same hands, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer just Maria the housekeeper who happened to know how to play piano. She was Maria Santos, pianist, daughter of Carlos Santos, keeper of musical traditions, storyteller through melody and harmony. The videos of her performance started appearing on social media that very night. Mrs. Blackwood posted a clip with the caption, "Discovered an incredible talent hiding in plain sight tonight." Dr. Peterson shared a longer video with detailed commentary about Maria's technical skill. Even some of the other guests posted their own recordings, each from a different angle, each capturing a different moment of her remarkable performance. By morning, the videos had been shared hundreds of times. By the end of the week, they had gone viral, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Maria found herself receiving calls from music teachers, concert promoters, and recording studios. Reporters wanted to interview her. Local television stations asked her to appear on morning shows. The offers that came in were overwhelming and wonderful. A small recording studio offered to produce a demo album for free. The local symphony invited her to audition for a solo performance. A music school offered her a scholarship to complete her formal training, even though she was decades older than their typical students. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the one that happened at home. Maria moved her old keyboard from the closet to her living room and began playing every day. She started teaching piano lessons to neighborhood children, sharing her gift in a new way. She began composing again. writing new pieces that told the story of her journey from silence back to song. Jake, transformed by shame and genuine admiration, became one of her biggest supporters. He used his social media accounts to promote her performances and help set up a website where people could listen to her music. His cruel joke had accidentally launched her comeback, and he seemed determined to make amends by helping her succeed. 6 months later, Maria Santos walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall for her official debut performance. The same hands that had cleaned houses and served appetizers now commanded one of the world's most prestigious venues. The audience that night included many faces from the Hendersons' party, people who had been there for her accidental debut and wanted to witness this triumphant return. As she sat at the concert grand piano and prepared to play, Maria thought about her father, who had passed away 5 years earlier, never knowing that his daughter would one day perform on this legendary stage. She thought about all the years of silence, all the dreams she had thought were lost forever. Then she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play, filling Carnegie Hall with music that told the story of second chances, of hidden talents revealed, and of the incredible things that can happen when someone finally finds the courage to show the world who they really are. The girl who had once been invisible was invisible no more. Maria Santos, the pianist, had finally come home.